So in the last edition, I asked if anybody had any questions, and in this edition, I'll try to answer what questions I can. I apologise if I get any of your usernames wrong, but some of them really have flummoxed me. Matthew see what I mean? I'm so sorry. Asks, "Hey Chris, when you go around the UK to film locomotives, what do you have for breakfast?" I don't. Usually I prefer to catch up on whatever sleep I can, or if I need to get up at 2:30 in the morning, yeah, that's a thing in my field of work, then a few spoonfuls of raw coffee keep me awake for the long drive that usually happens before a shoot begins. If the budget allows, then I don't say no to a bacon and sausage roll, but the trouble is that budget rarely allows because some people still prefer to nick my work over buying it from one of the official outlets. So, thanks Internet. MDHGames asks, "Hey Chris, what are your most memorable steam locomotive childhood memories? Difficult to pinpoint any specific ones, but I'll always remember visiting the National Railway Museum and the Bluebell Railway at a very young age." Aidan Strand asks, "Hey Chris, what's been your most favourite or most interesting GTI to make?" Most interesting to make? I'm currently torn between George Hudson and carriages, as I learned a ton about both subjects during my research. But favourite, though kind of awkward to admit because of the subject matter, was the L&B discrimination allegations. I know some of you have been asking for a follow-up to that one, but at this stage it's still a bit of a touchy subject. Though it was actually really nice to see so many viewers coming forward in the comments to share their experience of feeling singled out in railway circles. It certainly shows that discrimination is an issue that needs addressing, albeit carefully and on a case-by-case basis. Just Another Lad on the Internet, I like that name, asks, "Hey Chris, what do you think of the Puffing Billy Railway in Victoria?" Short answer, I went in 2009, I loved it, and if money were no object, I'd go back there tomorrow. If they'll have me. tobyakirkby asks, "Hey Chris, when will you cover some of the smaller railways like Rocks by Rail?" The answer is the same as the one I can give to anybody who asks me, "When will you review this loco or go to film at that railway?" One day. Chances are I'm already working on it to an extent, though it helps if railways don't turn me away. David Newton asks, "Hey Chris, what is the actual gauge of Gauge the Issue?" 42. David Newton also asks, "Hey Chris, what do you think of the issue of heritage railways ending up too long so that a run on them actually takes a significant part of the day and may discourage non-enthusiasts from visiting?" Forgive me for sounding patronising, David, but that's actually not a bad question. We often tend to judge how good a railway is by how long the track is, but actually with children able to sit still for only so long and some people only having so much free time to spare, it's hard to justify taking them to a heritage line that takes too long to get round. I mean, if you drove your child to the Welsh Highland Railway, boarded at Porthmadog, and they only lasted as long as Pont Croeso, about 2 miles up the line before they want to turn back, then you've still got 2 hours to sit through before you reach Caernarfon, 5.5 hours before you get back to Porthmadog to pick up your car at the end of the round trip. I guess while it's important to offer a nice stretch of track for people to enjoy riding, it helps that heritage lines have more to offer than just a train ride, such as good catering, open sheds and museums. Tom Waddell asks, "Hey Chris, what extinct locomotive type or types would you like to see resurrected as new builds? Money no object, perhaps Big Bertha, Stanley's Turbo Motive, a Dean Single. There are others of course, but there's so many to choose from." Drew the Train Lover asks, "Hey Chris, I've noticed throughout your videos that you chastise diesel and electric locomotives. Why? I know they brought the downfall of steam, but they are more economical. I'm not going to dispute that, because they are more economical, but getting someone who's got no real enthusiasm for any diesel or electric traction to endorse such traction is like getting the late great Fred Dibner to endorse 90s pop music. It's just a terrible, non-fitting idea. No slip-style diesel or electric reviews for a reason, I'm afraid. Not even if someone offered me enough money to buy the big boy off Union Pacific, ship it over to the UK and run it on my own custom railway with bridges and tunnels big enough to allow it. Hey, Dobwall's Forest Railroad was closed years ago, so why shouldn't anybody dream of building a bigger version of it?" Intercity 125 asks, "Hey Chris, how time-consuming is Gauge the Issue when compared to steam locos in profile? It's nowhere near as time-consuming per se, but the research is still pretty comprehensive. It can still take months to write an editorial until it's gotten to a point where I can say to myself, yeah, I like that, and then it can be touch and go over whether or not it'll actually go out because the topical timing might be slightly off. Whatever the case, the edit can usually take a week or two compared to slips, which can take anything from 18 months to 8.5 years. And the worrying thing is, there are some editions of slips which are taking even longer than that. Ludwigtales Season 3 asks, "Hey Chris, will you review the P2 2007 when the engine is finally out?" I guess so. The story of the L and the R P2s is fascinating in its own way, and showcasing it on slips is something I'm interested in doing. But then the problem is, there's more than one of them being built at once, and one is progressing much better than the other. So in the interest of balance and variety, I'd have to wait for the pair of them to be finished. And who knows, by the time one of them is done, I may have either retired, lost interest, or can't afford to do it anymore because social media would have handed ownership of my work to somebody else. Yeah, that can happen. Harry Connett asks, "Hey Chris, would you ever want to see a remake of any classic railway films such as the Titfield Thunderbolt or the General, and do you think they could be as impactful as they once were?" Long and short, no I wouldn't, and no they couldn't. You could never remake the Titfield Thunderbolt. The General couldn't be done without Buster Keaton, and there's already far too many soulless remakes being produced today. Even the really bad railway films I just wouldn't touch with a barge pole because they were such bad ideas that couldn't be rescued. Jacob Furniss asks, "Hey Chris, a highlight for me last year was seeing you give a great presentation at the Wells and Walsingham Railway. Oh, cheers buddy. Will there be any more Slips roadshows in the future?" I hope so. I am pushing for more talks, and as of this editorial, I've been booked in for a return talk on the Wells and Walsingham over June the 6th and 7th. Make a note in your diaries, everybody. But the gig scene is what it is. I'm trying to reach out to other venues to showcase Slips and premiere either the latest film or ones that will never get shown on YouTube, but getting through to each railway is variable. So to all heritage lines and railway clubs around the country, please feel free to get in touch. Robian Knight asks, "Hey Chris, what are some historic events or fictional stories centered around railways that you would like to see put into cinema?" Now this is where Hollywood potentially steals ideas, but I'd love to see the rivalry between Stanier and Gresley in the 30s turned into a feature film, a la Ford v Ferrari. I'd love to see one of those gritty mainstream TV period drama thingies do something about the life of Brunel and paint him like the rock star engineer that history says he was. And I wouldn't say no to someone adapting Jenny by J.B. Snell or The Railway Phantoms by Dennis Hamley. GTI reviews on either of these books depend on request by popular demand. PiggyNice06 asks, "Hey Chris, what inspired you to make this series? I'm glad you asked. I came up with Gauge the Issue after watching several editions of the Jimquisition and The Big Picture with Movie Bob before thinking, there's tons of things to discuss and forever being discussed about rail-related issues and media, but nobody's really doing it in video form. The mainstream press do their thing very well, no question about it, but none of them have really contextualised Buster Keaton's The General, or paid homage to The Train Now Departing, or discussed the precise reasons why mass DOO isn't such a good idea after all. Hell, when the L&B discrimination accusations came up, the press kind of shied away. For me, it's just nice to look at the subjects that are worth looking at, but for some reason others don't." Edward Moye asks, "Hey Chris, if you had to pick the best time period of British steam traction purely based on the quality of the locomotives produced, out of early or pioneering, pre-grouping, grouping, wartime, early BR years or late BR years, probably either the 1930s or the early 1900s. The 30s were an exciting time for newer, faster railway technology, while the Edwardian years, while known for disparity between the rich and poor, more so than now, boasted a terrific array of elegant designs, ones that we just didn't see after World War I. Shuey asks, "Hey Chris, is it unlikely you'll do a Slips on scrapped locomotives, similar to the E2 during Gauge the Issue?" Very unlikely, I'm afraid. When there are no examples to showcase in preservation, an insufficient number of decent photographs and film clips to showcase them in their heyday, no sound recordings, inaccurate models, poor quality paintings and baffling drawings, what is there left to actually show? Don't misunderstand, I'm interested in contextualising the history and philosophy of locomotive types that may not exist anymore, such as why the E2s weren't quite as good as popular culture assumes they were but were carried by sheer luck for 50 years, but if you're looking for a full-on visual review just like Slips with the same level of detailed close-ups and action shots, I'm afraid it's impossible. I'm a filmmaker, not a magician. Thomas Coolman asks, "Hey Chris, why haven't you talked much about Thomas the Tank Engine and how it changed railways, like example the Tallaght Railway?" There's two primary reasons why I don't mention Thomas on Slips or GTI. Firstly, there's plenty of Thomas discourse and fan media already out there from people who are so authoritative and enthused about the subject that I've got nothing left to add other than say, "So what?" or "Oh yeah." If you're looking for a place to talk all things Thomas, then I'd recommend checking out the Soda Island forums and their adjacent blog and fan site. Hell, I'm even sure that Martin Clutterbuck's Real Lives of Thomas website is still knocking around somewhere if you look hard enough. And secondly, I get told off all too often about the rare occasions that I have brought Thomas up by request, usually from the same pool of people who tell me off for not bringing Thomas up. The internet, where double standards reign supreme. Barry O'Sullivan asks, "Hey Chris, why is Normandy, or rather an LSWR B4, the mascot for Slips? Any reason for this in particular?" One very good reason, as it happens. The image in question was a present from British Railway Stories illustrator Dean Walker. He gifted it to me when Slips was just starting out, and we'd already been friends for a while before then. So from episode 2, the LB and SCR Terriers, the logo kind of stuck. Thanks again, Dean. 103 NVRThomas asks, "Hey Chris, I'm thinking about buying copies/downloads of a few of the Slips videos on your YouTube channel. What would you recommend going for, and why?" It's a matter of individual choice, really. If you prefer a tangible hard copy of something, like so many in railway preservation do, and are interested in the narrow gauge and foreign types we've reviewed down the years, then I'd say the DVDs. But if you're just after a specific class of engine, or would rather something you can play in non-compressed HD quality on a mobile device, then I'd say the downloads. The choice is yours, my friend. Just please don't download them from YouTube, or I'm going to stop putting them up there to begin with. Callum Rowley asks, "Hey Chris, have you been down the Battlefield line in Bosworth, and can you film some clips at the railway and possibly give some history about the railway on YouTube? I've been to the Battlefield Railway a few times for the 2800 and small pannier films, with clips of said railway appearing in said films. But as I've said in a previous editorial, reviewing heritage railways has kind of been done to death. So no, I won't be talking about its history on YouTube, I'm afraid." Jim van der Kolk asks, "Hey Chris, if you ever go to the States, what classes of locomotive are you most likely to cover?" If I ever get to the States, I don't really know. The big boys and DNRG Mikado seem to be pretty obvious choices, along with all the incarnations of generic American 440s, but first I've got to get there. I've looked into America every year since 2015, and each time the costs go up by about £2,000. As of 2020, to get the whole crew and all of our equipment across to review a minimum of 3 types of engine, because why would you go halfway around the world and only stop at one, with the right travel insurance, accommodation, travel costs, food and basic living expenses, you're looking at about 10 grand, minimum. It's something I'm determined to do while I keep producing Slips, but I would need a crowdfunding campaign like I've never done before. And the same goes to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Japan, India, Denmark, hell, anywhere really that's a long way from home. And finally, Steam Dream Productions asks, "Hey Chris, what's the best advice you'd give younger enthusiasts, whose parents might not share the interest in trains nowadays, on how to get more involved in this hobby? It depends on which stage of railway knowledge and enthusiasm you've reached. In the early stage, best thing to do is to ask for any film or TV show that predominantly features trains, either for birthdays, Christmas, or just presents in general. If you're above base knowledge and would like to become more proactive, then maybe try encouraging them to take you to heritage lines as a typical day out. They don't necessarily have to hang around with you if you're able to look after yourself. Then maybe see if it's worth joining your local line or somewhere further afield that you find is suitable for you. It's not up to me to decide what makes a good parent, but having been fortunate enough to be brought up by 2 fantastic parents who have little to no interest in trains themselves, a family would be more encouraging of their children if they took interest in something that sets them up for adulthood, something that enhances their independence and maturity, and volunteering on a heritage railway or working in the rail industry can do just that, though maybe not so much on enhancing the latter. So yeah, I guess that's all the questions I can rattle through right now before I start to repeat myself. Thanks for your questions, everybody. It was kind of fun. Maybe I'll do this again in a couple of years' time. Next time, hopefully business as usual. I'm Chris, and I'm here to gauge the issue.